It was one of those mornings when the airport seemed to be moving in a blur. The usual hum of conversations and the shuffle of travelers' feet filled the air. I was in line at gate 23, waiting to board my flight to New York. There were a couple of flight attendants in their crisp blue uniforms, the usual crowd of stressed travelers, and the chaotic energy that accompanies the beginning of a long-haul flight. I had been on edge for days. My family had recently made headlines again, this time because of a new partnership with a tech giant that promised to change the landscape of the industry. And with that spotlight came attention I wasn't used to. People stared, whispered, and I did my best to ignore it. But as I stood there, waiting for my turn to get to the gate, a hand suddenly landed on my shoulder. A stern, commanding voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me, ma'am. Could you step aside for a moment?" I turned to see a young woman in a dark blue uniform, her name tag barely visible. She was standing with another staff member, both of them looking at me with a strange, unreadable expression. "Is there a problem?" I asked, suddenly feeling uneasy. The staff member cleared her throat. "We need to check your boarding pass. There's a discrepancy with your reservation." I froze. I had double-checked everything before I left, and my reservation was confirmed. Something wasn't right. The two staff members exchanged an awkward glance, their eyes flickering between each other before they returned their focus to me. The tension in the air shifted, and I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. "May I see your identification, please?" the woman asked, her tone no longer as polite as it had been moments ago. I handed over my ID without hesitation. It wasn't like I had anything to hide, but something about the way she was looking at me made me uneasy. I had been through countless security checks in the past, and nothing had ever raised any flags. But today was different. The flight attendant glanced down at my ID, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the information. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your reservation," she repeated. "We'll have to check this out further." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by, check it out further? This is a direct flight. I don't see how there's any issue." The other staff member, a man who had been standing off to the side, stepped forward now. "We need to take you to a separate area. Please follow us." I hesitated, my gut telling me that something was off. This wasn't a normal boarding delay. My mind raced. What was happening? Why was I being singled out? I glanced around the crowded terminal, noticing the curious stares of other passengers, some of them now openly watching the scene unfold. I wasn't sure if I should be angry or concerned. But either way, I knew I had to comply, even though every instinct in my body screamed to walk away. The flight attendants led me down a quiet hallway, away from the bustling terminal. My heart was pounding in my chest as we passed security checkpoints and narrow corridors. The atmosphere was far too cold for comfort, and I could feel the weight of every step as I followed them, unsure of what was happening. We arrived at a small office near the gate where a senior officer waited, sitting behind a desk, glancing over paperwork. He barely looked up as we entered, but the two attendants seemed to expect this moment. They exchanged a quick nod before one of them spoke. "This is the passenger with the discrepancy," she said, her voice more firm now, as if she were relaying some sort of urgent matter. The officer nodded slowly, still not making eye contact with me. I stood there in complete silence, watching his every move, my mind spinning with questions. Was this a mistake? Had I been randomly selected for some sort of search or additional screening? I needed answers. Finally, the officer looked up. "Ma'am," he said in a tone that was far too calm for what was happening, "I need to ask you a few questions about your reservation." "Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though the knot in my stomach had now tightened into a full-blown ball of anxiety. "But I assure you, there's nothing wrong with it. I double-checked everything." The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he motioned for one of the attendants to hand over my boarding pass and ID. The attendant did so, and he scrutinized the documents with intense focus, flipping them over a few times as if something wasn't adding up. And then it hit me. It wasn't the reservation. It was me. I had heard stories before, of wealthy passengers being treated differently, of being watched under a microscope, but I never thought it would happen to me. I had no idea who these staff members thought I was, but something told me they weren't just doing their job. They were making assumptions, and in that moment, I realized why. The silence in the room was suffocating as the officer continued to look over my ID and boarding pass. His gaze flickered up to meet mine, then down at the documents again, as if he were searching for something, some clue that would explain why I was standing here, separated from the rest of the passengers. I was about to speak up again, to ask why I was still being held, when the officer's eyes suddenly widened ever so slightly. It was a small shift in his expression, but it didn't go unnoticed. He leaned forward, a hint of realization creeping into his features. His eyes locked onto mine, almost as if he had just recognized something. "Wait a minute," he muttered to himself, barely audible. You're the heiress to Nellen Technologies, aren't you?" I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The name of my family business had just slipped from his lips in the most casual way, like it was some common knowledge. I hadn't been expecting this, not here, not like this. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What did you just say?" The officer didn't seem to notice my discomfort. Instead, he glanced at the two attendants, a knowing look passing between them. "I thought so. I've read about you in the news. Your father's company is valued at over $1 billion, right?" The words hung in the air, thick with implication. I could feel the color rising to my cheeks. My heart was hammering in my chest now, and I was doing everything in my power to hold it together. I nodded, though my mind was spinning. How did he know? Was this how people saw me now? As a billion-dollar heiress? What had started as an ordinary airport experience was quickly spiraling into something far more uncomfortable, and I had no idea how to control it. One of the attendants, still standing by the door, cleared her throat awkwardly. "We, apologize for the confusion, ma'am," she said, her tone suddenly much more polite. "There must have been a mix-up in the system. You're free to go." But it wasn't that simple. I could feel the change in the air, the shift in how I was being viewed. No longer just a regular passenger, I had become a symbol of something else. And that wasn't the worst part. The door to the office opened, and the air felt lighter as I was finally allowed to leave the small room. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled deep inside me. The attendants quickly escorted me back to the main terminal, but the entire atmosphere had changed. The staff members' apologies felt hollow, like they were just trying to rush me out of the situation without acknowledging the true issue. As I walked back toward the gate, I noticed the stairs again. Passengers whispered behind their hands, their eyes following me with an unsettling mix of curiosity and judgment. I was no longer just another traveler. I was a walking headline, a woman with $1 billion fortune in her name. My mind raced. The assumption that I was just another rich heiress, out of touch and deserving of whatever special treatment came with my status, it was all too real now. I had been treated differently the moment they realized who I was. The confusion with my reservation hadn't been an accident, it had been deliberate. They thought I was some kind of easy target, someone they could push aside, perhaps hoping I wouldn't raise a fuss. But I wasn't some spoiled, entitled woman who would just sit back and accept their mistake. Not anymore. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I approached the gate once more, but this time, I wasn't in the mood to let this slide. The world was watching me now, whether I liked it or not. The attention was inevitable, but I could use it. I could turn the situation around, and I would. Just then, a voice broke through my thoughts. "Ma'am," a new voice called out from behind me. I turned, startled, and saw another uniformed staff member approaching. He was holding a phone in his hand, and there was an urgent look on his face. He looked as if he had something important to say, but I didn't trust him. Not after everything that had just happened. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. He hesitated, glancing at the phone and then back at me. "There's been a mistake," he said quietly, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "A big one. And I think you should know about it." I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever came next. The new staff member handed me the phone with an apologetic look. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of the situation still hanging over me. This entire ordeal felt like one surreal moment after another, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear whatever revelation was about to come next. But I took the phone from his outstretched hand, and as I pressed it to my ear, the voice on the other end was familiar. "Hello?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Miss. I mean, ma'am, this is Michael from Nellon Technologies," the voice on the other end said. "We've just been informed about a situation at the airport, and I need to apologize immediately." It took me a second to process the name. Michael was my family's right-hand man, someone who had been with the company for years. He was one of the people who knew all the ins and outs of our business, someone I could trust. "Michael?" I asked, feeling my breath catch in my throat. "What's going on? What do you mean? Is everything okay?" He didn't answer right away, and the pause was enough to make my heart race again. "Ma'am," he began slowly, "it seems that the airline staff, well, they didn't just misinterpret your reservation. They thought they were dealing with someone who wasn't a part of the company, someone who couldn't possibly be who you really are." I felt a chill run through me. "What are you talking about?" There was a deep sigh on the other end. "They treated you like you were just another rich passenger. They didn't recognize you at first, and when they did, well, they made assumptions. Assumptions about your background, your family, and about how they could handle you. It's more than just a simple mix-up. This was discrimination, plain and simple." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Discrimination. The very idea of it seemed foreign, something I'd only ever read about in articles. But hearing it from Michael's mouth, hearing that my family's company was now wrapped up in a scandal because of it, it hit differently. "Why did they think that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Did they think I was some kind of—" "I don't know, just another person they could dismiss." "I don't understand why this is happening." Michael's voice softened, more sympathetic now. "It's not just about who you are, it's about what they think you represent. Wealth, power, status. But that doesn't give anyone the right to treat you like that. We need to take action, and I'm going to handle this." But I could feel it, the deep-seated anger bubbling up inside me. I wasn't just going to let this slide. They had wronged me, and it was clear they thought they could get away with it. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't someone to be underestimated. The moment they made assumptions about me, they sealed their fate. "I don't want just an apology," I said firmly, my voice no longer shaking. "I want them to pay for this." I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, letting Michael's words sink in. The idea of discrimination against me, of being treated unfairly because of assumptions about my background, felt both surreal and infuriating. I had worked hard to get where I was, to build the reputation of Nellon Technologies alongside my family, and now this? The rage I'd been holding back suddenly bubbled up, hot and fierce. I could feel the eyes of the passengers on me again, their whispers and sidelong glances more obvious than ever. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I walked back toward the gate, my steps purposeful and strong. The two attendants who had initially escorted me were nowhere in sight. But the senior officer, the one who had recognized me earlier, was still standing at the desk near the gate, exchanging some last-minute words with another employee. When he saw me approaching, he stood up quickly, his posture stiff. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience," he began, but I didn't let him finish. "No," I cut him off sharply. "I've had enough of your apologies. This isn't about an inconvenience. It's about how you've treated me, and how you've treated passengers like me. You didn't just make a mistake with my reservation, you assumed that I was someone you could dismiss. Someone who didn't deserve to be treated with respect. The officer's face flushed a little, and for the first time, I could see a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. He was visibly shaken, but I didn't care. He had no idea what he had just started. I'm going to be speaking with the head of your airline, and with the press if I have to. This is not just going to disappear because you want it to, I continued, my voice steady and resolute. You've made a huge mistake, and I won't let it slide. The officer looked flustered now, and he stepped back slightly as if to distance himself from the confrontation. I assure you, we'll make things right. No, you won't, I interrupted. Making things right isn't just about an apology. It's about accountability. I'm going to make sure everyone knows how your airline handled this. How you handled this. I could see the officer trying to find words, but nothing came out. And in that silence, I knew I had already won. I turned on my heel and walked toward the gate once more, feeling a new sense of power rising within me. I had already made up my mind. This wasn't just going to be about correcting their mistake. This was going to be a lesson for everyone, staff, passengers, and even the airline. I wasn't some passive heiress to be pushed around. I had the resources. I had the platform. And now, I had the anger to fuel the fire. The flight boarded without incident after my confrontation with the staff, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The way the officers and attendants looked at me now was different, respectful, almost fearful. I could tell they knew I wasn't someone to be trifled with. But I wasn't done yet. As soon as I was seated in my first-class cabin, I pulled out my phone and fired off a series of emails to the head of the airline, my legal team, and several well-known journalists I had connections with. This wasn't just about my personal grievance, it was about sending a message. If the airline thought they could get away with mistreating passengers based on assumptions and biases, they were in for a rude awakening. The email to the CEO of the airline was short but to the point. I was recently treated with disrespect and assumptions that no paying customer should ever experience. You should know that I will not let this incident slip by without further action. Your team's handling of this situation has been unprofessional and discriminatory. Expect a formal complaint, a media statement, and potential legal action. Then, I sent a message to Michael. This isn't just about this incident. I'm going public with this. It's time we take a stand against the systemic issues in the way these companies operate. I'm pushing the boundaries, and I need your support in making sure this goes as far as it needs to. Let's get the story to the press. As the plane took off, I leaned back in my seat and looked out the window. The city below slowly shrank into the distance, but my mind was already racing ahead. The emails, the phone calls, the press, everything was set into motion now. The damage had been done, but it wasn't just the airline that would feel the heat. The message was bigger than that. I had always prided myself on being more than just the heir to a massive fortune. But today, they had shown me how people still viewed me, how my wealth made them see me as something else, a target for their assumptions. It was frustrating, angering, and, frankly, exhausting. But I wasn't going to let them control the narrative. This wasn't just about getting an apology. It wasn't about feeling personally wronged. This was about showing everyone that no one, no matter their status or background, should be treated as less than. I had the power to change the conversation. And now, I was going to use it. As the plane soared through the sky, I thought about the road ahead. I was ready for whatever came next, whatever the airline or the press had in store for me. This story wasn't just mine, it was about anyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. It was about making sure no one else ever had to experience what I had. And I was just getting started. Days passed after the incident at the airport, but the fallout was just beginning. The airline tried to contain the story, issuing a statement apologizing for the misunderstanding, but the damage was done. The press had picked up on the story, and it spread like wildfire across social media. My emails had done their job, and soon enough, the media outlets were knocking on my door. The CEO of the airline called me personally, trying to smooth things over. His voice was tight with frustration, and he offered everything from a full apology to compensation for the inconvenience I had faced. But it wasn't about the apology anymore, it was about the message. "I'm not interested in your compensation or your apologies," I said firmly. "You don't get to make this go away with a few words. This is bigger than just one person, one company, or one flight. This is about how people like you see people like me, and that's something that needs to change." The CEO stumbled over his words, clearly unprepared for someone to stand their ground like this. "We'll do whatever it takes to fix this," he insisted. "I'm offering you full cooperation on any media statements, anything you need." I shook my head, a smile creeping onto my lips. "You don't get to control the narrative anymore. It's already out there. People know what happened, and they'll keep talking about it. I'm not letting this slide." The pressure began to mount on the airline. The stories about the incident hit national news, and soon, the hashtag Billionaire mistake began trending on social media. The airline stock took a hit, with public outrage growing. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about how easily someone could be discriminated against when the people involved didn't see them as equals. Eventually, the airline issued a formal apology on national television, but the damage was irreparable. The public's perception of them had shifted, and nothing they did could undo that. They had made a mistake they couldn't walk back from. But for me, it wasn't over. It was a victory, not just for myself, but for anyone who had been treated unfairly, anyone who had been dismissed or belittled because of assumptions about their background. I had used my position not to just demand justice for myself but to shed light on an issue that many people were too afraid to confront. As I watched the media coverage unfold, I knew that this moment had made a difference. The public would remember this. The airline would remember this. And from that point forward, I wouldn't be just the heiress to a billion-dollar tech fortune. I'd be someone who had turned the tide and made sure people like me, and people unlike me, were treated with the respect they deserved. And that, in the end, was the true victory.